Welcome to today's episode of The Underlined Will, a segment where I try to cut through all the noise and underline what actually matters. I am your host speaker, Will. I want to start with some recent events in my life where I began to wonder, why have divorces become so common and acceptable in our society? Because within the last 40 plus years, this societal shift has seemed to create a new narrative or a new basic story plot. It's a plot with a cycle that seems to be kind of Groundhog Day-like in this repetitiveness. So today I'm going to be exploring this concept of a new story archetype that I'm going to call the cycle. This is unlike the traditional basic plots that author Christopher Booker has claimed to be that there's only 7 in existence. Well, my story plot can be described as a repetitive, unending journey, much like the myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus is a Greek mythological story with a king that was condemned to the underworld and forced to roll a massive boulder up a steep hill. Each time he gets to the top, the rock just rolls right back down, and it forces him to start all over again, forever, creating a never-ending cycle. Now, in my own life, I seem to experience this same plot cycle through my marriages and divorce. Well, it kind of started even before I was born, because my parents were married, and then about a year after I was born, they got divorced. And then now today in my adult life, this pattern has become repetitive. And the first time that I got married, I was 18, so I was kind of young, but it did last for about 5 years, and then we got a divorce. A few years later, I met another woman, we get married, and then 3 years later, once again, divorced. Here I am, a few years after that, well, quite a few years after that, where I've gotten married again. And now I'm going through a third divorce. Now, this kind of partnership journey seems like it's kind of going in this same repetitive, never-ending cycle. And I want to walk you through the thought process, because the cycle diverges separately from the 7 traditional archetypes, which were defined by Christopher Booker. Now, the first typical story plot is described as overcoming a monster, and I can't say mine really fits in that. Because overcoming the monster typically involves facing a formidable foe and achieving some sort of victory. However, my experience doesn't seem to have some singular monster or even some final triumph in it overall. It's just a simple but endless repetition of this life challenge without any clear resolution. The next story plot from the 7 is the rags to riches, which involves a transformative from a low point to a high point. Now, while I might consider that finding a new and better suited partner, it seems like that might be my life of rags to riches, but it's been more about enduring this cycle rather than reaching a definitive peak. So, moving on to the quest story arc, which involves a journey with some sort of goal and resolution. This narrative doesn't seem to fit my scenario either, though, because it seems like I'm looking for a partner, but my most recent marriage was not one that I was seeking or asking for. As it turns out, my wife was the one who asked me to marry her. Therefore, it wasn't like a singular goal or endpoint, but rather it seems, again, about enduring this repeated cycle and no definitive quest. Maybe we could look at a voyage and return. This basic archetype story plot involves leaving home, home being defined as wherever your heart might lie, but leaving home and experiencing an adventure, and then returning back somehow changed or transformed or even improved in some kind of way. However, my journey so far has lacked this transformative return, and it's more about, again, the repetitive, never-ending cycle. Maybe overall, right, we could say, hey, let's look at the terms of maybe it's a comedy story. And a comedy can often resolve a heavy or lighthearted situation. And I can say that I have laughed, but I don't really know how else to react to the situation of this cycle of marriage and divorce. I mean, I can laugh, but I mean, it's not really that funny. This just doesn't make comedy really fit. And it has been about reaching, and it's not been about reaching any kind of joyful or humorous conclusion, but rather this continuous, dragged on loop. Well, maybe it's not comedy, but tragedy. It does sound kind of tragic. And while there is a sense of loss through this divorce, I can't really say that my cycle shows a single downfall, as this situation keeps happening and this ongoing repetitive Groundhog Day without any kind of final catharsis. Now, the last and potential basic storyline is a rebirth, which involves a renewal or a fresh start to the concept of partnerships. Well, in my experience, I see no true renewal and have only seen the repetition. I mean, what am I really talking about here? Am I just sitting here talking about my life scenarios where I can't seem to keep a long-lasting relationship? I mean, it is possible, and it is probable, but my story hasn't ended yet. And maybe there is something else that is controlling the cycle from a different medium. Similar to Sisyphus in the underworld, where he's pushing the boulder up only to have it fall again, which is then being controlled by the underworld. Maybe my situation is this new narrative in society that's being controlled by the standards of government, who just seems to kind of have this reluctance to let us grow and can just continue to dangle this carrot in front of me. I don't know. But maybe if I just recognize this story or this cycle, I can open up in new ways in understanding my life. Understanding my life as this cycle of endurance instead of something typical. I mean, look, I really don't know. And I'm just kind of glad that maybe you're going to hear my thoughts on this. And so I want to thank you for joining me in this explorative idea and this new basic story plot that kind of goes beyond the typical 7. Again, I want to say thank you. I hope you enjoyed, and you have a wonderful day.